In the same vein, we have another article where 94% of Native American women are reporting being raped. Now,
What?
yep, 94%. Now, there's a reason why I bring this up, and that's because you always hear about, the poor migrant women, you always hear about poor women in general, but very rarely do you hear about Native American communities in America, and actually, they're almost as bad as they say. When you look at the stats on human trafficking in the world, by percentage, Native Americans are more trafficked than any other group on the planet. And this is solid. I mean, this is solid research, and they have higher levels of alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence. And these are one of those things where nobody cares about the Native Americans because they're not breeding and they're not increasing and they're not asking for anything. So when all's said and done, you're overlooking a real problem for a fake one, which is that they say 1 out of 4 women get raped on college campuses, and sexual harassment is rampant because women get told they're good looking on the street. So we're now in this place where we're overlooking what actually happens. Listen, I don't think it's 94%, but I bet you it's as high as 80% in the Native American community because of what happens when you focus on bullshit crimes as opposed to focusing on what's actually happening.
You guys, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, I was trying to speak on the Merkel thing, but
Go back. It's
I
fine.
don't know what happened. It's all right because all I wanted to say was that I heard that she's going to be stepping down anyway. But go ahead, Truck. You had something to say?
Yeah, I did. Me being a semi driver, I go through a lot of Native American reservations. Yeah, no, it's fucking dog shit there. Like, take the worst ghetto you can imagine and just crank that shit up to 11, dude. I mean, I legitimately one day just watched this. This kid couldn't have been older than 14. He literally had a fucking surgical band around his arm and was just shooting up heroin right in the fucking street. It's pretty fucking bad in those communities.
Well,
Oh God.
I've
Well,
seen
and
some Native American episodes on my end. Like, I was at a bus stop, and this chick, and of course, every so often they have like these little shelters that keep you from the rain, like when you're waiting for the bus
Yeah.
at the train station. Now, there were this Native American couple, and she just dropped her pants, like leaning up her butt up against the glass, and then just took a piss right then and there. Pulled her pants up and walked away like it was nothing. Like, my goodness.
What?
Hey, these are the
and
same people. sorry, go ahead.
well, this is sort of where I have a problem with the progressives that are all bleeding hard and want to help out. Like that's lovely. I'm all for helping out. Please, by all means, raise people's standards of living. Congratulations. Problem is, life is kind of counterintuitive, and there's a lot of ripple effect that comes from just giving a handout. And as nice as it seems to just give a handout, if you continually just take care of people by giving them a handout, it has these long standing, far reaching effects on the rest of their culture and their development as human beings. It's really kind of sad.
Also, remember that
Canadian.
progressives, they love winning on both coming and going. So the thing is they have this narrative that European ancestry people are evil because of the slave trade and because of what they did to the native population here in the States. So they basically run a narrative that the native population was completely genocided and wiped off the planet. Like they say, they'll admit that there's like a couple natives left, but not really. Because if you disrupt that narrative, you have to then also admit what's going on in the native communities now anyway, and they win again. Because then they say, oh, well, if things are so bad and you're admitting that they're so bad, then what we should do is help those communities. And now they have an excuse to implement even more progressive policies.
It's literally
Which,
because of their policies that the Native Americans are in the position they're in. Sorry to cut you off, but go.
yeah, and that's where I kind of want to make the point of like, none of this is judging Native Americans as individuals or people. We're all sort of identifying like, yep, this is another example of what you get when you take a culture and support it on handouts. And this would happen with any culture that you support on handouts instead of hands up,
It,
so to speak.
exactly. And even if you look at the United States, the various cities that, especially the left leaning cities that give all these free handouts, what happens is you have all these freeloaders that come there, and eventually it just evolves into one big tent city. If you ever seen that movie, I mean the YouTube video called why Seattle's dying. If you haven't looked that up, it's a very, very good example because Seattle used to be this wonderful city, and I used to call it the happiest place on earth. And there was a time where there was just no other place I wanted to live in the United States because it was that awesome. But ever since
Bro,
you had all of these, ever since you had all these leftist politicians come in there that don't understand basic economics, they've been spending like I think it was last year they spent like $1 billion on trying to help the quote unquote homeless. But when now and the people have been calling them out on this, and it's gotten so bad to the point that the police they can't even do their job. They when they try to actually hold these people accountable because you have all these people that come there, just for the welfare and for the drugs and so forth. What happens is that the police they can't do their job, and when they arrest them and put them in and book them in jail, they end up getting released the next day or sometimes even that same day. And there's this one guy who killed and raped a woman to death for over an hour. It was excruciatingly painful, I imagine. And yes, he got out scot free. And my goodness, what they don't realize, or should I say, what the people don't realize, I'm pretty sure the politicians already know this, is that one the most humane thing you can do is actually stop spending all this money on the homeless because most of these homeless people they're not even from Seattle, and the homeless people that were actually from Seattle, they actually live pretty comfortably, and no, they weren't nearly as bad as the homeless people that flock there. So when you stop spending money on the homeless, the homeless people they actually self-deport, and then the problem goes away eventually, and then the city can go back to normal.
You know,
It also puts front and center that the ones that don't leave because it's not financially viable, they're usually mentally ill, and the state has an obligation to help people who are mentally ill, but it's really difficult to do when you're having trouble even finding them. But when people leave for economic reasons, then the people who are left tend to be mentally ill, and something can be done to help them.
Yeah, a lot of homeless people are mentally ill. You'll find them standing on the corner just yelling at nothing, like "I will not take orders from a talking sandwich," and yeah,
Well, that's what Halsey's identifying is. I'm sure we can all agree that yeah, it's probably in society's best interest to look after those who can't look after themselves and figure out some way to make sure they're accommodated for. The problem being is that butts up against the natural inclination for humans to be completely fucking lazy and try to take advantage of such a system. And unfortunately, people gaming the system are now given undue credence when they claim victimhood.
well, the simple solution is just private charities. It's amazing to me how many people just don't realize that.
you can't just force altruism on others through the state. It actually has to come from the inside. You could call it like altruistic egoism. That's the only way you can actually make any kind of giving work.
And if you'll notice that the way that plays out completely is that Democrats and far left progressives give less to charity than any other ethnic group or any other religious group on the planet. Is that they give none of their money to charity because they don't believe that it should be something that's voluntary. They believe it's something that should be forced. So if the government isn't forcing them to give their money to help people, they're not going to do it. In a sense, that's why they want the government to force everyone to do it, so that if they have to do it, everyone else does too.
And I'm not thrilled about getting the government involved because I tend to take the mindset government should just be a referee. It should not be trying to take care of stuff like this. Sure, leave it up to private charities, but I suppose coming from the expat progressive rearing, problem with charities has always been that there doesn't seem to be much of a force on making them effective. So it becomes its own sort of virtue signal without a real consideration of what the results of the charity are. And you sort of end up what you see with like the Southern Poverty Law Center, where the charity can't, it loses track of the fact that it's trying to put itself out of business and just seeks to perpetuate its own existence. So, yeah, sure, private charities can be a wonderful answer, but the people donating to those charities really need to stay on the ball of checking the charity and the results they're producing.
I mean, you
Agreed.
bring up a really big example because the environmental charities, this is like their absolute force of being. Is most of them started over what at the time was the DDT scare, which was a completely manufactured crisis. It was a poet who actually wrote a book about DDT thinning eggs in the eagle population, and I think it was called Silent Spring, was the name of her book. And it talked about how it's going to expand and all of a sudden all these bad things were going to happen that had never actually been scientifically proven. And in fact, even the thing about the eagle eggs was tenuous at best. And at the time, now look, I'm not saying it would have been like this forever. The mosquitoes eventually would have developed some kind of immunity to it anyway. But at the time, malaria had become a nuisance disease in Africa because of DDT. And DDT was one of the safest pesticides ever made. But they banned it everywhere. And in addition to banning it here, they banned it to any country that accepts U.S. aid. So every country banned it and started using actually really toxic pesticides in order to take care of mosquitoes and take care of other bugs, and they don't even work.
Oh, yeah, fucking Roundup. There's been a story going around in my country that some people are still killing weeds in their gardens using fucking Roundup. And since everyone and their mothers here has a dog and they love walking around everyone's yard with them, the fucking dogs go sniff around the gardens, they eat some fucking weeds, and when they get fucking Roundup in their systems, they keel over, their kidneys shut down, and they pee themselves death. That's actually happening in the world right now. I mean, mostly it's just a whole bunch of bullshit in Facebook, but it's still being a real problem this fucking year.
But then you see that the environmental charities, because they're not willing to just say, okay, we did what we needed to do, let's shut down, they start inventing more shit in order to keep going. I mean, the climate change alarmists, no prediction that they have ever made has come true. Not a single one of what would happen because of climate change. Yet they're raising billions and billions of dollars to fight climate change. So they're incentivized to keep making shit up, to keep making up the effects, because after, I mean, look at what AOC is saying. She's saying in 12 years the country won't exist anymore, and she's backed up by a couple lunatic Democrat politicians too. So we're at the point now where people are raising money to fight a fake problem with no actual proof that it's real because of a political agenda, and it's going to always get worse.
You know, interestingly, this is where I've kind of been toying with the idea of, similar to term limits, a sort of term limit or expiration date on legislation and corporations. Just a natural deadline of like, great, you get to be a corporation, you naturally dissolve 5 to 10 years from now, wherever things fucking stand. And if you want to continue, you can reincorporate and everyone has a chance to reinvest and you can transfer the property over and all of that. But it would sort of provide this incentive where identifying of, well, something becomes maladapted for society because it's trying to perpetuate its own existence. Well, if you started its existence with a known deadline and knowledge that it can't perpetuate beyond that, then
I mean, just so you know, real quick, I know we'll sobercat this one in one sec, but it real quick, that actually does exist in the tax code. If you pass a tax cut that isn't fully paid for, in terms of that the revenue is going to be made up somewhere else, and I'm not a fan of doing that, but whatever. But it has an automatic sunset after 10 years. That's why you hear all the time of, oh, they just voted to extend the Bush tax cuts for another 10 years or something like that, because they automatically sunset. There are other laws that also have sunset provisions. One of them, the most famous one, was the assault weapons ban. When Clinton passed the assault weapons ban, it had a 10-year sunset. So during the Bush administration, it sunset and they just let it die. So they didn't have to actually pass new legislation to legalize the assault rifles that were banned under Clinton's. They just became legal again anyway. So it already does exist. And a lot of people have suggested it for nonprofits, that your nonprofit status will extend for 10 years and that's it. And if people want to still give you money after that 10 years, that's fine, but they're not going to receive any kind of tax incentive for it.
I like this. Who can I vote for to expand this?
Yeah, good luck with that one. Our politicians are all awful, but it's something that can be brought up on a local level.
Taco Island.